So, my name is Mia Hanks, and I am a survivor of narcissistic abuse. I was married to a covert narcissist for 29 years. And in the last year, I've been able to disentangle myself from that situation and be free from that. I have a website, miajhanks.com, that has a lot of good information about narcissism and also a TikTok account where I'm trying to raise awareness about narcissism and narcissistic abuse. And that is at NPD, that stands for Narcissistic Personality Disorder, at NPD and me. So yeah, I'm just really passionate about raising awareness about narcissistic abuse.
Perfect. So take us from the beginning. When did you realize that you were in a narcissistic relationship?
I didn't realize it was narcissism. I knew pretty early on I was seeing red flags, but I got married very young. I was 21 years old. And I think, I had never known a narcissist. Certainly, I had never known anyone with the personality disorder. And so I wasn't aware of those red flags. I didn't know what I didn't know. So I guess the first thing I noticed early on in my marriage was just a general lack of empathy. But I didn't see that as a red flag. I saw that as a personality quirk, and thought, with time that will get better. But of course, narcissism never gets better, it only gets worse. So definitely that lack of empathy was sort of the beginnings of me realizing this person has some issues.
I spoke to a few people who are in a narcissistic marriage, and similar to you, what they've all shared, and this was a bit of a surprise to me, was it they didn't realize it until much later on into the relationship. And
Correct. Yes.
right? And unfortunately, another thing that happened is that when they realized what was going on, a number of years still went on that they were still in that relationship. And I know on the outside looking in, and maybe you've heard this, some people could always say the first sign of trouble, or leave him, leave her, they're toxic, they're this, run away. But
Right.
to a lot of people, it's not that easy because you can have children involved. You can be invested emotionally. You can be invested financially. So why do you think some people, what do you think some of the reasons are that some people stay in the relationship, even though they've identified a point where they're like, okay, something doesn't seem right here, but yet the relationship continues forward?
Yeah, that was my experience exactly. I was married for 29 years, and it wasn't too far into my marriage that I knew there was, it was toxic. But I think a lot of people end up staying in these narcissistic, abusive relationships because, well, for a couple of reasons. One is that, to the outside world, I think we all want to for people to think that we have it together. We want to project this image of we are the perfect all-American family. And so I do think there is an embarrassment factor that a lot of people don't talk about. And in my situation, I was with a covert narcissist. So to the outside world, he was this wonderful, charming, kind, generous, very empathetic person. But that was just a mask he was wearing. Behind closed doors, he was controlling, he was manipulative, he was abusive. But there's that fear of who's going to believe me because everybody else thinks he's great. So I think, you there is the embarrassment factor. There is the fear of who's going to believe me. And another thing people don't talk much about is financial abuse. If you're with a narcissist, chances are they are controlling 100% of the money. So it doesn't matter how wealthy you are, if you don't have control of those funds, you can't leave. It takes money to leave. And so a lot of people end up trapped simply because they don't have the funds that they need to get out. I mean, you have to be able to go somewhere, you have to be able to buy food. You've got to have some help. So I think for a lot of reasons, people stay trapped in these relationships, and it's really sad. I think it's, and society tells us you stay, you don't run, at the first sign of trouble, you stay and you make your marriage work. So, I think a lot of people that's their thinking. I need to stay, I need to make this work. And if I can do better, then maybe things will get better. And it's sad, but most of the time in these types of relationships, it's not unusual for people to stay for decades.
Yes, especially when you look at like the starting point, like the wedding for most people or for many people, the wedding day is such a celebratory and proud moment,
Right?
right? Like there's a lot of people, there's a lot of emotions, very strong, very positive in a lot of ways. Even someone that you necessarily don't like, they're pretty happy for you on your wedding day,
Sure. Yeah.
right? And then what I call it, the veil or the mask falls off, and you're like, oh my
It
God,
does. Yes.
is
Yes.
this the person that I married? But you're like, okay, maybe it's a one off because leading up to that point, there were essentially everything you wanted, especially in public. Like what I found with narcissists, like they have like this image that's very polished in public,
Oh, yes, they do.
right? Like, did you like how different was the person in public versus in private when you were dealing with them?
Very different. Um, and I think there's a term you may have heard called trauma bonding, and it's really akin to Stockholm syndrome. And this is very typical that happens with victims of narcissistic abuse, and myself included. I found myself helping him reserve that mask in public. Um, it was sort of my job to make sure that mask never slipped. So while he was kind of living this lie, I have to, as I look back, I admit I was helping him live this lie. And I wanted people to like him and think he was great. But yeah, behind closed doors, it all changed. It was completely the opposite. It was all about him. It was, the world revolved around him. He didn't really care about anybody else. There was zero empathy. There was intense control and manipulation, but none of that was ever shown outside the home.
How scary was that to see the transition from when I'm guessing when you're out and about with this person, and then when you came back home, you have no idea the type of person he was going to be?
Yeah, you really, and it creates a lot of anxiety because you find yourself basically walking on eggshells all the time. You don't know what's going to trigger him next, and you don't want to trigger him. So you kind of live in this state of fight or flight. And yeah, it's a lot of unknowns because with a narcissist, the tiniest thing can set them off. Any sort of, if they feel any threat to their ego, or if, God forbid, they start to feel like they're losing control, that will really set them off. And they can be quite volatile when those times come. I mean, they have to remain in control all the time and they have to be number one. And if either one of those things starts to slip, yeah, they will have, a full-fledged toddler style meltdown.
Did you find yourself compromising yourself in ways that you're kind of surprised in?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I didn't realize so much, but when I left, I can look back now and say, yeah, I would just try to keep the peace all the time. And generally, what that meant was I was compromising my own self-care and taking care of myself. And my physical health really started to deteriorate because of that. I found myself not sleeping very much, and I was really compromising my own well-being and my own happiness. Really, it was all about keeping him happy. So whether or not I was happy was completely irrelevant. It was all about if he's happy, then life can run smooth. And yeah, definitely, I compromised a lot of myself.
One person told me who eventually left the relationship. They had a hard time dating after that because when they looked at all the things that they did for this person, even though this person in hindsight wasn't worthy of some of the acts of service or some of the ways that they were sharing love with them, they found themselves struggling to understand that is the way that I'm loving good enough for the next person. And they had a real hard time understanding that just because you gave us your love a certain type of way to person number one doesn't mean that it's inadequate for person number two. Is that something that maybe you battled with, where when you're trying to maybe create relationships after this, there was some struggle there?
I think the struggle comes primarily in not trusting. I think that coming out of this type of relationship, you find it very hard to trust anyone, but also, like you said, feeling like you are enough. Because with a narcissist, you can never be enough. It doesn't matter what you give, what you are. There is never, you never attain that status of enough. And after so many years, that really does wear you down, and your self-confidence is shot. And you feel like, and I have struggled with that. You feel like you are not enough for the people around you. So it's a lot of sort of psychological repair that you have to do, and just sort of untangling your mind from all this damage that the narcissist has done. But I think in general, it just makes you not trusting of other people. That's at least that's what I can say for myself.
And I think that trust from the people I spoke to and interviewed is it's an emotional trust. Like they don't feel that they could connect to someone on an emotional level that maybe they wanted to before they got into this narcissistic relationship. I remember one man, he was telling me that when he finally left his narcissistic marriage, his view of the world was completely different than it was prior, but he was able to at least catch himself in it. But he did struggle because he started to see women, unfortunately, as disposable, because his experience was that he was disposable, because I guess he eventually found out that his narcissistic partner was able to move on a lot quicker than he was. And
Yes.
then he felt hurt because he's looking at it as, this person did this to me. They're able to find someone so quickly, and here am I trying to pick up the pieces, and I can't find anyone because I don't have the trust. I can't. I'm emotionally distant. I'm experiencing all these things, and it just piled on to his trauma. Is this something that you see, maybe not in yourself if you don't, but in other people as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they always say that the narcissist is always the one that moves on the quickest, whereas the victim is left behind trying to, like you said, pick up those pieces and put their life back together. So, it's almost like when I left my husband, he did have he did go through a rough patch there where he felt discarded. And it was a hit to his ego. That's the only thing that bothered him. He wasn't the least bit concerned about what was going to become of me, my healing, if I was going to be okay. That was not even on his radar. He was only worried about, how will this make me look? How will people think about me? It's all just me, 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 me. But yeah, he moved on very quickly, and that's what they do. They find their next victim, really, and they latch on as quick as they can because they have this facade, this false persona that they have to keep up. So he's got to make himself look like he is on top of the world. And, but it's all about them. They're not thinking about, the person that left them. They're not thinking about even their current relationship. It's just how they look to the general public.
I give this example of graduation, right? And when it comes to like someone who's abusive, a narcissist, physical abuse, financial abuse, which as you touched on earlier, a lot of people don't talk about the financial abusive part,
Yeah.
is there's a victim, unfortunately, that graduates every year, meaning just like high school, just like college, meaning that there's always going to be, unfortunately, someone to be abused. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why narcissists can move on so quickly is they use you up, your resources, your emotions, your feelings, your intimacy, even. And then if the person eventually gets the courage to leave, or if they've used them up, they discard them and move on to someone else. And then they do the same thing, wash, rinse, repeat. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why they can move on so quickly, because they've crafted such an image that they have to maintain, and that image, unfortunately, a lot of times is dependent on the person that they bring in as well.
Yeah, definitely. And they don't target just anyone. It's important to note that they are very specific in what they are looking for. So just anyone won't do. They need someone that they can manipulate. So they tend to fall for people pleasers, um, people who maybe have codependent issues, and basically people that they can easily guilt because they love to use guilt. So if they can guilt you, if they can make you feel like everything is your fault and you will accept that blame, then I mean, that's a gold mine for them. They don't want to see somebody that they're not going to be with somebody who has strong boundaries, and who is just kind of otherwise a strong person. They are going to go for the people pleasing type. And yeah, I mean, they know what they want, they know what's on their radar, and they hone in on these types of people. And it's really sad, because whoever they cling on to next, that person is just ultimately going to be a victim.
Were you surprised that you ended up in a narcissistic marriage?
Yeah, I was. I had grown up in a real idyllic childhood. I wouldn't say that I had strong boundaries, but I attribute that to the fact that in my background, I didn't really need strong boundaries. I wasn't trying to really protect myself from anybody. And so I was very naive. I had come from just a really good background, and I didn't believe people like this were out there. So it wasn't like I had come from trauma or anything like that. It was quite the opposite. And I was just so naive and thought everybody was good. I just couldn't believe that people would have bad intentions. Um, so yeah, I just didn't know these people existed. And it wasn't long into the marriage that I realized this guy is, he has some issues. But here I am, and I felt like, well, this is just, that's how it's going to be, and I need to learn how to make this work, and I need to learn to live with it.
Let me ask you, when you look back now, and you made a good point, like you came from a background that is quite good from what you've shared, right? It wasn't filled with trauma,
Yes.
wasn't you were maybe someone that had a distant mother or an emotional bankrupt father. It was pretty ideal.
Yes. Yes.
And yet you can fall for this because I think sometimes some people think, okay, if someone's being abused, they must look like this. They must have this job, this level of
Yeah.
education, right? Like they stereotype the type of abuser. And I think sometimes that's done in a way to maybe be dismissive of how much help you're going to give. You're like, well, she's a barista at Starbucks and she probably comes from a broken home and she probably is one of five other children who have three different fathers. Like we kind of try to
Yeah. Yeah.
diminish, right? How much help we're going to give. But speak to us to the point where anyone, well, sorry, and from an abuser can find anyone from any background. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, it doesn't matter if you're college educated or not. It can happen to different types of people from different backgrounds. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, it can happen to anyone, and I think back when I got married, and I was coming out of college, and people weren't talking about narcissism, and I think when you thought of domestic abuse, you only thought of physical. There just wasn't a lot of talking about psychological abuse, and certainly narcissistic personality disorder. I had never heard of that. So yeah, I mean, it's really easy to stereotype and say this is the type of person that would fall into an abusive relationship. But something like, when you get into especially the psychological abuse, I mean, this kind of stuff can happen to anyone. So you can find a victim in anyone with this type of stuff because it's just the awareness is not there, I think.
I 100% agree. I think that if you were to ask 1,000 people, describe, let's say, domestic violence, right? Or domestic abuse, or even abuse in general, I think a lot of people would answer that it's physical,
Yeah.
but they miss out the financial. And the reason why I like to point out the financial side is the financial side has such long reaching so has such a long reaching impact. Like the person literally feels like they can't leave,
Yes, definitely.
right?
And another thing that I think people don't think about a lot of times, and I don't know what the statistics are, but a lot of times with narcissistic abuse, you see it's quite prevalent in very high socioeconomic groups. Um, and and in my case, my husband is a very wealthy man. And it's really easy when we talk about stereotyping and stuff, it's really easy to look at a situation like mine and the lifestyle I was living and say, they have it all. There's no way they have any problems. They have all the money they want. Their life has to be great. But one thing I've learned is you can't be so quick to think that. You don't know what's going on behind closed doors. You really don't. And you see somebody out there, this married couple that really seems to have it all, but and they really seem to have it together, but you don't know. You can't be so stereotypical. There are a lot of people in very high socioeconomic groups that are quite literally trapped in miserable marriages, abusive marriages, because even though they seem to have all the money in the world, they can't access it. And so it doesn't matter how much you have if you can't get your hands on it to be able to leave that relationship, you know, it's like a golden cage. You can find yourself trapped. And it's really, I think people just don't realize that.
One woman shared with me that her spouse, her ex-spouse now, but her spouse at the time, they were well off. I don't want to say I didn't get the person that they're rich or wealthy, but they did their 2 to 3 vacations a year. So very like, let's
Yeah.
say upper middle class or lower upper middle class, right?
Yes.
One thing that she shared with me was that it came to the point where she was being financially abused, and she called him she said that he had narcissistic traits as well, where she would feel like she had to perform for some form of financial freedom. So essentially, she was like on an
Right.
allowance and things like that. And
Yeah.
I think some people don't understand that when you're in a relationship, it's most relationships, I would say that there's no way that dollar for dollar, the two people involved make the same amount of money or that the same amount of resources. That's just impossible,
Correct.
right?
Correct. Yeah.
So there's going to be someone who is maybe more resourceful, more finances, and in a healthy marriage, healthy relationship, that's perfectly fine. But what some people do is that they use that resources, that power, that finance to control and dictate the person.
Yes,
But it's
definitely.
done, right? But it's
Definitely.
done such in a subtle way.
Right.
Do you
And
agree with
with
that?
narcissists, a lot of times when the husband is the narcissist, that sort of dynamic, they often don't want the wife to work. They see money as power and money as a way to control. And it is a very effective control tactic. So, you know, my husband, he didn't necessarily want me to make very much money because that would mean I might be financially independent. And when you're financially independent, you have a little more say so over, you would be able to just pick up and leave one day if you decided to. So they like to keep you very dependent on them. It's extremely important to them. And I know my husband felt like there's no way she'll ever leave me because, I'm providing her this wonderful life and she'll never walk away from this. Um, and he indeed made it difficult when I did leave and he realized what was going on. The first thing he did was drain the bank account, so that I couldn't get money for food. I couldn't, and that's very typical, but they do use money as a means to control their spouse.
It's like their trump card, like their
Yes,
weapon in it, right? Because
it
in this part
is.
of the world, you need money to literally do everything, to exist.
You do. You do.
You do.
Yes.
So I had similar situation when she eventually left. She planned her escape, but she opened another bank account and that's where she was putting funds, but she had to do it in a way that wasn't noticeable because to your point, the narcissist is very controlling, right? You're
Yes.
entangled in their world. Where you going, who you with. You said you're gonna be home this time, you're gonna be home that time. Did you notice like a control aspect of their behavior as well?
Yes. The control was the way that my husband controlled me was through time. He wanted 24/7 of me. He didn't want me to have friends necessarily. He really was adamant that, he thought I spent too much time with my parents. He didn't like that. They don't want you to be out there building a support network. He didn't want me to have any hobbies. If I wanted to do anything for myself, it would have to be after he was asleep, basically. Anything that I did, if I watch a TV show that he didn't want to watch, in his mind, that was time I should be spending with him. Um, and so, yeah, it was just that my time was so controlled that it made living just it became impossible. It was absolute misery all the time. And you don't think about, you think about being controlled in other ways. You can't, don't eat this, don't eat that, don't see this person, don't talk to that person. But when it's your time that's being controlled, it feels like it's your whole entity to the point that you kind of lose yourself. So it's not a good feeling.
How was your perception of time when you were in that type of marriage, and how is your perception of time now?
It's interesting. When I was in that marriage, there were all these things I wanted to do, and I had hobbies and things that, the way I wanted to spend my free time, and I couldn't. And it was, I think my perception of time was just, I just need to survive to the next day. I just need to somehow make it through this day, and maybe tomorrow will be better. And then when I left, it was interesting because I can remember waking up those first few mornings when I was free from him and thinking, wow, I can literally decide for myself how I'm going to spend my day today. I can decide what I'm going to do, what I'm going to wear, what I'm going to eat, where I'm going to go, what kind of hobbies I'm going to engage in, when I'm going to take a nap. I mean, the freedom was unbelievable, almost overwhelming. You don't quite know what to do with all the time that you have. So, my perception of time now, there's so many more hours in my day. It's so exciting. I love it.
I was told that the first couple of days after escaping this type of situation, there's like a shock and a little bit of anxiety. Are those some of the emotions that you experience?
Definitely. And those first few days of when he realized I was actually gone and I wasn't coming back, I think my first emotion was fear. There was a lot of fear. Is he gonna drain the bank account, which he did? Is he going to? I mean, how angry is he going to be? What's he going to do? So I think it was a very tense time. It definitely took some time before I was able to enjoy that feeling of freedom and realize I was free. Because leaving a narcissist is scary. They don't take no for an answer. And it's just not on their agenda for you to leave, for them to be discarded. It's just not, that's not how they play. So yeah, definitely in the beginning, it's scary. But as time goes on and things, the dust settles, the freedom is overwhelming. And yeah, it does kind of give you some anxiety because suddenly you have all this time and you have to figure out, what do I want to do with my life? I don't even know because you've been so wrapped up and invested in their life. So it's just really getting to know yourself again.
It's like looking back in a reflective perspective and saying, okay, this was how was Maya, how was Mia before this? How was Mia during it? And how is Mia going to be now? Do you remember how you were prior to all this? And is that version of you coming back?
How I was prior to this relationship, I had a lot of confidence. And I felt pretty good about myself. I felt capable and somewhat strong. And definitely, a little bit into this relationship, all of that was gone. So I would say no, it hasn't all. I mean, I'm not the same person I was before. I think it's a daily, growing a little bit every day. It takes a while to restore the confidence that, that you once had, because the narcissist wants to make sure that you know that you're not capable. You're not smart. You can never make it on your own. You can't handle, you just can't handle things on your own. You need them. And so you have to learn to trust yourself again, and trust that, yes, I am smart enough. Yes, I can do this by myself. So it's a learning experience, and I think it takes everybody's on a different timeline. But I think it definitely takes some time to rebuild.
Take us through some of the ways that a narcissist will strip away the power of their partner, maybe their confidence, maybe their self-worth. Take us through that process.
Well, narcissists use gaslighting a lot. And you do hear that term. It's kind of a popular term right now. Unfortunately, when you hear it used, oftentimes it's not being used correctly. I think most people don't really understand what gaslighting is. Um, it's not just lying, or, gaslighting it runs much deeper than that. It has to do with the narcissist changing the narrative and really making you feel like you're kind of going crazy, and you really start to distrust yourself. So, for instance, if I were to say to my husband, it really hurt me when you said this or when you did this, his response would be, and of course they never apologize, his response would be, well, you're remembering that wrong. It really wasn't as bad as what you are saying that it is. And then, my husband would say, you're too sensitive. You blow things out of proportion. And to the point that after years and years of this, you really start to think, well, maybe there is something wrong with me. And maybe I do see things, I blow things out of proportion, and I'm just not remembering things right. And, slowly that just starts to erode your sense of, am I capable? Am I capable of remembering things right? Am I capable of responding correctly? And it just wears down your self-esteem and your confidence over time. So I would say that gaslighting is a huge factor in stripping away your self-confidence.
That's something that you hear, to your point, so often. Like you hear the word gaslighting quite a bit, and even to a degree, trauma bonding, because you can have a marriage, you can have a relationship that the person is treating you this way. And because you're so determined to see the good in them, you would bond with them. And then you're giving away so much more of your power. And this just fuels the narcissist, right? Because
It
now not only
does,
do
yeah.
they have you emotionally, they have you maybe sexually, they have you financially. There's so many ways for them to keep you in that situation. And I want to ask you, when you hear of people who are it's so important to them to be loved, to be fine, to find love, and they get themselves wrapped up in these types of situations. I wonder how many of them do you think stay because there's a part of them that's thinking, well, Mia, I know that he's the devil. I know that she's the devil, but this is the devil I know. Out there, I don't know that devil. So for me to rebuild is kind of scary. Do you think that maybe happens as well? And that could be a reason why so many
Yeah.
people do stay?
Yeah, that actually is a really good point. They, even though they are living a miserable life, it's a life that they know. And out there, it's scary, right? Especially if you've been in this marriage like I was for nearly 30 years. Um, and then the thought of starting over again, it's daunting, right? And so I think for the sake of just being quote unquote comfortable, um, people will stay because, like you say, it's this evil, but it's the evil they know. And I think what happens when people make that decision to just stay and write it out is, and I know I did this as well, you start normalizing that abuse and you just start convincing yourself, every marriage has their problems. Probably everybody kind of lives like this. And, you start to try to convince yourself that it's not just you. Um, but yeah, I do think people get in a rut, it's miserable, but it's the misery they know, and they stay, and it's not a good decision. It's not a good decision to stay. It really is not.
Yeah, because you've normalized the behavior. So now, if you were to escape it and you haven't healed, which I've seen people do, they go out there and what do they find? Another narcissist.
Another narcissist, right? Because it's what they know, and I think people tend to gravitate towards what's familiar. There's something about feeling safe in what's familiar. Although with a narcissist, you are not safe. And in fact, I never felt safe for a single day of my marriage. But still, it's that I think a lot of people, human nature is to gravitate to what's familiar to them. And unfortunately, you hear about that a lot. People will end up in narcissistic relationship after narcissistic relationship. And it's, you got to learn to really hone in on those red flags.
I think I was watching an interview and someone was sharing that they came out of, I think it was two narcissistic relationships. I don't know if it was marriages, but they were with someone and there was two different people. And they caught themselves in a way that was interesting because they've shared that what they ended up doing is that they ended up becoming the very thing that they didn't like, a narcissist.
Yeah.
And they were mistreating people and they were causing chaos. And it was interesting to listen to how you have someone who was able to escape. Because let's be honest, there's a lot of people who don't escape these things,
Oh,
right?
I
Like
think way too many people that
way
don't
too
escape.
many. Yes, yes. So you have people who don't necessarily escape, they end up losing their life as a result, or
Yes.
something else, not as bad, but that does happen. And then you have some people who escape it once, twice, however many times, and they end up becoming what they have escaped. So now the cycle is being passed on, not by the narcissist that was abusing them, but because the narcissist has altered them in a way that now they've become what they've escaped, and now they're doing the same thing to other people. Have you heard of that happening?
That I haven't really heard of that, no. But I definitely have heard of people going, one right after another, just attracting narcissists like they're a magnet. But yeah, I guess I could kind of see that because if you sit there for year after year and you watch the narcissist in action and you learn their playbook, I guess, you definitely develop an understanding. And another thing is, I guess if you're, watching the narcissist year after year, they get their way. They always get their way. And so, yeah, I guess if you just see this person that always gets what they want, it's crazy. But yeah, I guess I could see how that maybe could happen. It's
Yeah,
unfortunate though, because then the cycle is just, it's just a vicious cycle and it's passed on and on and on.
that's exactly what he said. He said that they were able to get what they want. So now it's my time. I'm paraphrasing. Now he was able to do this to get what he wants.
Because
But
it
it
was
took
his
him
turn to, yeah, I mean, I
exactly.
guess I could see that psyche, that you think I've given and I've given and I've given, and now it's my turn to get. So I guess you could have a complete, 180 there where you decide it's my turn now. Um, it is because it's just kind of sickening to sit and watch these narcissistic people and they get away with everything. And the more they get away with, what I've noticed, the bolder they become and the more reckless they become really because it's just this, their ego just builds and builds every time they get away with a little bit more, and they can become quite volatile.
Yes, yes. And it's like when you see it's like someone's robbing, well, this is probably, I don't want to dismiss the pain of it, but a comparison maybe could be that every single day someone comes into your house, steals something, and they get away with it. You're
Yeah,
powerless, you
exactly.
can't do anything. That's what the narcissist is, right? The narcissist is stealing a part of you,
They are.
and you don't know how, like, when you come out of it, you don't know how you're going to be. You may be the person that's going to turn around and say that, you know what, this happened to me, so I'm going to do it to other people because I want to regain my power. That's
Yeah,
one way to regain your power, to exert power over someone else, because the narcissist is damaged in their own way,
they are
right?
definitely.
Right.
Yes,
But
yes.
now you have someone else who can come out of it and say that I want to heal myself because I want to be better. I'm going to take my time. And that's probably the healthier way to do it, but that's probably the longer of the solutions. So I can see human nature being that I was mistreated. Now I'm in a position to mistreat people, and some people go that way, whereas some people are like, I was mistreated, I've escaped. I'm
Yeah.
happy that I want to be a better person because I don't want to be a prisoner of this narcissist anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think those people that do turn to narcissistic behavior themselves, they effectively are still a prisoner of that narcissist. And definitely healing yourself is the longer route, the longer solution, but so worth it. And you do have to want to heal yourself. I mean, you have to have that desire to want to be healed, because it's hard work, and it takes time to really sort yourself out after, especially if it's been decades. It's a lot of damage that these people can do to you.
Let me ask you a question, Mia. When looking back on your marriage, and I haven't been married, but I've been in relationships that have ended, and I always think that there's a point in the marriage or in the relationship where you're like, this is looking back now. This is when I knew something was wrong and when I should have gotten out of it. As you look back on your marriage, what is something that you want to share with other people who are maybe in a narcissistic relationship, but they haven't identified that one point in their relationship that's saying, hey, you know what? Something's wrong here. I need to keep an eye out on this and not ignore it.
Um, I would say one thing not to ignore is a lack of empathy. If you see that this person cannot self-reflect and they cannot see things from other people's perspectives, definitely that's something not to ignore. And that's easy to just sweep that under the rug and say, well, it's a personality quirk, but it's okay because those things don't get better. Those little things that you notice, um, don't ignore the little things because those little things end up becoming the big things. With my marriage, each passing year got worse. That empathy got worse. The ego got worse. It just everything piles on and piles on. So I would tell people out there, if you're noticing these little things and and another thing to really pay attention to is really look in and see, ask yourself, how does this person make me feel about myself? And another question to ask yourself, do I feel safe with this person? Um, these are red flags, and don't ignore these little things. I never really felt safe, but I never paid attention to that because I thought, well, that's just me, it's my problem. I'm having a problem here. If you don't feel safe, you probably aren't safe. So pay attention to your intuition, and don't let those little things pile up.
That safety one's a big one. I'm surprised how many people ignore the feeling of not feeling safe,
It's huge.
right?
And in fact,
Hmm.
that is what, so I never knew what was wrong with my husband. I knew there was something up, but again, because I wanted to preserve this perfect all-American family facade, I just sort of threw it on the back burner. Um, but toward the end of my marriage, that word was the key for me. I was scrolling through social media one night. This was probably 27 years into my marriage, maybe longer. And I came across a post. I believe I was on Instagram. And the post said something, it was about true intimacy. And it said something about, I don't remember it exactly, but about true intimacy isn't necessarily physical. It's more about being able to look at your partner and say, I feel safe with you. And when I read that, it struck me. And I thought, I've never felt safe. And that is what prompted me to start doing some research. And I started getting on the internet late at night and Googling things like toxic marriages and how do I know if my relationship is toxic? And all of these things led me to discover narcissistic personality disorder. And that was where all the pieces fell into place. So safe, that's an important word, safe.
It's very important. That's why we have safe words and safe places. It's very, very important. And I challenge anyone, it doesn't matter if you're in public or in private, if you have this sensation of you're not feeling safe, you need to listen to it because it is your body is signaling you that something around isn't right. Like thousands of years ago, that's how we like when we used to be hunter gatherers. We used to be out there and we used to feel that sensation. We used to look around. There used to be a dinosaur, there would be a woolly mammoth. Flash
Yes.
forward, right? Now there's okay, there's an abuser, there's an attacker, someone might have a gun. It's like walking home late at night and you're walking down a street that you're familiar with because you've walked that street 1,000 times, but that one night you feel unsafe. How many people are going to say, it's nothing. I've walked down this street 1,000 times. That could be
Yeah,
the
I
one
think
time, right?
yeah, I mean, it is a really, it's really important. And I think we discount it and we just blame ourselves and say, well, it's just me kind of feeling paranoid or whatever. I remember a book, I can't remember when it came out. It's been out a long time. It's called The Gift of Fear. And it is about this, it's about paying attention to that intuition that we all have this intuition. And it's like a survival skill that is ingrained in all of us. And you have to pay attention. If you're not feeling safe, at least try to examine what's causing you not to feel safe. Because I went through years and years and years of a marriage where I never felt safe. And had I tuned into that many years prior, maybe I would have gotten out sooner.
Why do you think so many people ignore that warning sign of them feeling unsafe?
I think, they think that they're only unsafe if they're experiencing physical abuse, if it's something people can see. And I think, just a general feeling of I don't think I'm safe is just not enough to prompt very many people to actually say, I think I need to leave my marriage. I mean, it seems, leaving a marriage, leaving a long-term relationship is a big deal. And society tells us, especially if you have kids, you stick with it. You don't let your kids be children of divorce. You don't break up your home. So I think, just that intuition of not feeling safe is for a lot of people, it's not enough to prompt them to think that they need to do something about it. You get so entangled in these relationships that just that little intuition, that little voice in your head is easy to ignore.
So as we close, Mia, what advice do you want to give to those that may be trying to identify if they're in a narcissistic relationship and want to make sure that they can get out safely?
I would say do some research, do some reading, learn about this because that's where we can get our power by educating ourselves about this narcissistic personality disorder is a real thing. It is a real diagnosable disorder. And if you determine that that's what you're dealing with, please know that it's not going to get better. They're not going to wake up tomorrow and they're going to be cured. It just does not work like that. And I would just encourage anybody, don't waste any more time living in total misery, because that is what living with a narcissist is. It is misery. Just know that as daunting as it seems to untangle from this marriage, this relationship, it is possible. There are resources out there. There are people out there that can help. There's help available. So, be very meticulous in planning your escape and just know that there is a much, much better life on the other side of abuse.